In comparison to someone who's never dealt with it before.
Yeah.
How about you and Misty?
Oh, here we go. We're back.
No.
We're live, Fox 5.
Okay, so I want us to just kind of share. So I want us to go back through the questions and. Anyway. Okay.
Do you want to go like around one by one? Or do you want to do like a group?
So sorry. Listen, it's his fault. Okay, so question one. Robbie, can you reread the question for us, please?
Okay, what does it mean to be a senator during SGA meetings or Senate business?
So I don't want it to be group to group necessarily, but just having like a together conversation. Feel free to share like your personal opinions or what your group said, but that way we all can feed off of each other. Who wants to share? Okay.
I think it's to represent the undergraduate student body while keeping the interest of graduate students, faculty, and staff in mind.
Good. Our group kind of went around a bit for that. We only had 2 senators in our group, so
Right, yeah.
which we played out. So we talk about kind of not just that, but moreover, like technically it is in our job description that we like represent. We actually kind of like during meetings we have to be like the informed ones. So really know what's going on campus, like the vibe of campus, not only how students feel, but then also like from our SGCs, like how Adam feels about the situation that's going on, how other senators kind of feel about that. Like since we are a senate, it's like technically not super there, but like we have to be the ones to know. We have to be that forefront of students. So like if you need information, if you need to know what's going on, you need to know what's changing, what's staying the same. Basically that, like that's what we need to be doing, especially at our meetings, because this is where the information should be. I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
No. Looking at it, it's dry, okay? Chicago destroyed Mexico. Alright, who else wants to share on that question? Even if it's just a few words, so you don't have to share sentences, but like a buzzword or something.
You have a voice, undergraduate students.
With that, we're also like the ears. Going with SGCs.
Hands too. It's like,
We all do.
yeah, it's like we're like getting new stuff done. And we are the undergraduate student body. Can't forget that.
We're part of it, yeah.
We're students.
Alright, question 2. So, how do you guys, or how do you all act when you're outside of the Senate meeting? Or what does it feel like to be a senator that isn't in a meeting for you? What does that mean? What does it look like? Or what does it mean to be an FYA outside of FYA meetings?
So I think we talked about like being a senator outside, so you still have to be like professional. Because while not like everyone on campus knows who your senators are, like we were still elected, and definitely our friends and other people like do know that we are serving that role and are active members of the SGA, not only by equity and badges, but I mean we get the free SGA shirt, Lord knows wearing free sounds good. So, but like since people see us as like that, they see us as SGA, so we kind of have to be always, I don't know how to say on the best behavior, because I don't know if that's like the best way to put it, but we always have to like be a presence in the community, regardless of whether we're just like grabbing lunch or just talking with people about stuff, like we still have to like maintain that narrative.
Other people?
I think with that, it's we're trying to promote myself as a senator when I'm outside of an official Senate say. And that looks like in online, or if I'm at anything like a class or something like that. It's not. I'm not going out being like, "Hey, y'all, I'm a senator," you know. So, which is directly opposite to when I'm introducing myself in a meeting. I'm like, "Hi, my name is Brandon. I'm a senator." So it's two different ways of showing up.
Brandon, why don't you facilitate the next one? You can facilitate the next question.
Sure. So, the next question is, what is the reason I ran for election? Why do I want to be here, and why do I continue coming back?
That's fair. No, actually, as Jordan said, I'll speak my mind.
What did you just say?
I'll speak, like Jordan, I'll speak my mind.
What you spoke different language?
Right.
Yeah, I was like, oh.
No, I'm sorry. Sorry, that's the point. No, I think I like around this time I just kind of wonder like, why am I here? Like, this is so late. Like, I have so much work I could be doing and like sleep. But I don't know. I keep coming back. I think that there is like work that is done here. I don't know. I mean, there is work that's done here. I don't know other stuff. Not that there is work that's done. But it is important, and like, even though we all have other stuff going on, like, I think we all kind of understand that there is very important work to be done, and that, you know, it's valued. Yeah.
And like saying how the last two questions wanted to open this up to like the secretary and FYAs. Vice President.
And did you say Andy? No.
So again, it's like, why did you start? Why are you here? Why do you continue coming?
Okay. Well, I personally really like the idea of student governance and like, you know, committing to your school, being active in your school affairs and all that. That's why I'm personally here, and that's why, you know, I want to help make a change as a student, and I want to help voice the opinions and the, you know, the voices of other students within my class and my school. Can we have some more context as to the why we're having this conversation? Because I thought the initially when we were having this conversation, it was because of our other initiative group, and that there was kind of some confusion as to what it was to be a senator compared to, like, say, another member of the executive branch. So can we have some more like context to like this conversation?
Yeah. We're getting there. That's all I can tell you. This is like a process kind of thing. So first, I had you all break up and talk about why you're here first, because I don't think you can do the work unless you want to be here and you know why you're here. So once we were done sharing, I have a list of questions such as, what does it mean to be a senator when things get hard? What does it mean to represent the student body? What does that look like initiative-wise? What should initiatives look like? So we did a small group first, and then we came in a big group, and we're about to hit with one question, and then I'm going to ask them all this after we heard from each other. So take small group into collective, find a collective purpose, go into these bigger questions.
Okay. Sure.
Is there something else you want to say?
I don't know if it answered my question.
I'm saying that is the purpose of it. We just did some foundational work before we got to that question in particular.
I think it's more of a why the discussion in general, not why it's a question in particular. If I'm understanding the question properly, it's like, I get that, like, we want to make sure that we're like doing work, but why are we like now asking this question? What does it mean to be a senator?
No,
I have requests too. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought because like there was some confusion about the communication initiative group, right? If, for you who don't know, like we don't know about the communications initiative because it might conflict with what the executive branch is doing. Communications executive branch department. What the executive department is doing. So I thought that coming into this conversation, we were going to be talking about what a senator does compared to what someone in the executive department would do, similar to like what our initiatives are different like that. And I thought that's kind of like what this conversation, like what does it mean to be a senator is about.
And Lily, we also had a conversation with Colin, which we actually did discuss our initiative, and we broke it down to a spot where he was actually pretty comfortable with what we came out with.
That's separate from the conversation I had with him.
Right.
So maybe we all just need to get on the same page.
Yeah, that's what I thought this conversation was about, like what a senator is compared to something else. But I guess it's not.
I think for me, that was not communicated well to me as like the speaker. All I got was an email saying, during our initiative meeting, Colin suggested we have a discussion about what is it to be a senator. Can we add that? So there wasn't much context for me. So I thought you all wanted a conversation about purpose and why you're here.
Well, Colin also wanted us to have that conversation too, so it was a mix.
Okay, so I guess I just didn't get ample enough information, which like isn't really necessarily my fault.
Well, it's not fault, it's
No,
still a productive conversation.
Putting blame.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you all are, but I'm saying as somebody that makes the agenda, if you all want to shift this conversation, I'm open to that. I just need to know that so we can shift. But I think specifically for that communications conversation is more of a group conversation than it is a wider Senate conversation. But if you all feel differently, we can have that conversation now.
I feel like it's important enough for the general body. I mean, even though I'm not really speaking for my group, but just as a member of the secondary group, like the stuff that we're doing is something that we also very much want to publicize to the community, especially because it's for public safety, like that's a thing that, well, it's not public safety at this point, but like human relations or just like the continuing of that, something we like to communicate. So I think it is kind of important to understand that distinction that way. When communications like finishes their project, or at the very least like gets further through the mission when they start putting information out, I think it'd be useful for all of us to be on the same page of like what they are doing when it comes to that.
Cool. Point of clarification real quick. This like what you guys are saying is about this conversation is going to happen. Like with Colin, or is it like just separate?
So we talked to Colin about our communications initiative and a bunch of our goals. So we came up with a bunch of list of 5 goals. 3 of those goals intersected almost exactly with the Department of Communications within the executive branch. So he said that that is not our job and that we should facilitate those things with the department, not make it like our own responsibility, but that some of the other things were within that domain. So the things such as getting out the information, anything involving putting out information is not the role of the Senate. That's the role of the Department of Communications, right? So if we want to put out like our SGC updates, we want to put that out specifically. That's not our job, right? So the breakdown, the conversation we had that is worthwhile to bring up for group discussion is what we kind of broke our goals down to, and it was 2 things. So the first one was our first goal would be to create a system to consistently get SGC opinions from the student body. So he said because that just involves SGCs and receiving that public opinion from the student body that was within the scope of Senate's responsibility. So that would be the first goal. So getting that information. Second is communicating that information or creating a system to consistently communicate that information, or our SGC report information and other Senate information to the media branch of the department, of the executive, of the executive branch, so that they can then put out the information. So basically getting in 2 systems that aren't in existence currently. 1, to get information from the students, and 2, to put that information to the media branch, right? So, again, what are your guys' thoughts on that, I guess? Because that was what our conversation sort of boiled down to.
Yeah, and I think to tie it back into like what it means to be a senator, we were having trouble distinguishing like what it meant to be in the communications department compared to like what Senate things are, and I think that's where this conversation kind of picks back up, because like it's like what are senators supposed to do compared to another SGA member, if that makes sense. Like, yeah.
Right, and I think it's also not just like jurisdiction where we're kind of like doing the same work or not doing the same work. Also to think about like historically how Senate initiatives have been and the scope that they've taken, whereas it's less like managing.
Internal communication.
Right. Where like one example is like the state Black and Gold committee LA was doing was like kind of like making sure that students about to graduate had the funds available to them. So it's like kind of like a bigger thing than just SGA, where that's kind of like the scope and where we use our leverage that senators have that executive branch members don't, if that makes sense. Whereas they're being hired specifically to communicate with undergraduate students. Our positions, being on SGCs, being together and hearing from each other, allows us to be a little bit more ambitious almost.
And I think the reason why I stepped in recently is after conversations with Colin and Brenda, and I know they've all had conversations with you individually as well. I think it is coming back to that question of like, is this work the work that Senate should be doing? For the second question, you brought up like reporting back to the media. Colin has brought up that that's still not really our job, but his job to be like putting his people in these meetings and like their people in these meetings, and for them to be here rather than us taking the extra step to communicate out. And yeah, so after conversations with him around last week, him and I had the conversation that whether that wasn't understood clearly or I was then what's the right word? I then felt like I should step in before I just let you all get down a path that was too far, to be doing more work that is in line with what a senator should be doing, that impacts like students, that isn't duplicate work of what Collins and Brenda's people are being paid to do. In the past, initiatives have normally been like bigger and more impactful, and while this is impactful, when they properly set up executive branch and properly like working communication system, that shouldn't be the job of Senate. And I think Colin's concern comes from having genuine investment in your all's work and wanting to make sure the time that you're spending is not to waste. And I think he understands that that's at the detriment, not the detriment, but that's at like the crux of like what he's like his people are supposed to be doing that we confirmed 3 weeks ago. Go ahead, Jordan. And then Patrick.
Patrick go first.
Okay.
I think like speaking from what I understood, what I think you guys is concerned for, like, I think in the future, like, if we specify that at the beginning, it was like, because like I had no idea what was going on, and like so I answered the question like in a much more like abstract, like,
But that's okay.
Right.
It
That's
wasn't framed that way. Yeah.
That's why I gave the context, because
Yeah.
I didn't understand, like, that's not because, like,
Which
we
was
talked-
helpful because I didn't
Yeah.
either. So
Yeah, but I think it was good to have that conversation still.
agreed.
But now, like, now when we're talking about, like, why the conversation came to be, I think this at least helps me out, because this
Yeah.
is what I was, like, confused about.
Like
So,
the
like,
purpose. Yeah.
yeah, because, like, this is what I thought we were going to lead to. So now I think when Brandon said a senator, like, Senate initiatives or what senators do is more ambitious, it's more tied into connecting with the rest of the university rather than just focusing on students. So we're the students that are connecting with the rest of the university. But then at the same time, we have to depend on our own SGA to get that feedback from the students.
Yeah. It's like a Senate can't do everything kind of
Yeah,
thing. Like
okay.
we need to be putting faith in other people to do the work they need to do so that we can do our work, and it should be
Yeah,
ambitious.
okay. So that was the conversation that I was looking for, because
Yeah.
that was my confusion.
I'm glad-
So
yeah.
now I feel better.
Good.
Yeah.
I think, and that's why, like, that's a hard thing. I don't want to, like, I never want to shut down somebody's initiative, right? Like, but I think there is some truth in the fact that we probably could be doing more ambitious, things, with the understanding that Colin and Brenda are dedicated to making things better than they have been in the past. And so, by us continuing with this, it does constrict them a little bit to be as ambitious with their work as we do the same thing. So, does that help everybody?
The thing is that if we change our whole initiative direction, the
Change it.
initial, what?
I think what I'm encouraging you all to do is change your entire initiative, not the direction, the entire initiative.
Right, but if we do that, then we're going to fail to do what we set out to achieve with that initiative, which is to fix the hole between the Senate and the student body. To bridge that gap was essentially the purpose of the initiative. And that's still a gaping hole. So if we do end up changing the initiative, that hole remains broken, or remains open.
I think with the structure of the executive branch, that the communications department will fill that gap. So it's that they're going to do that for us, so we don't have to think about that issue, so we can think about other things that may go beyond scope of just like internal student government work.
It's
Does
more,
that make sense?
yeah. It's also like the Senate is not SGA, and so like we need
Ooh.
to be a bigger part of SGA, and by working on it by ourselves, we're kind of taking ourselves away from the bigger SGA, and like that's what their branch is for, is to communicate all of SGA, not just like the Senate. And so it's better if it's a bigger overarching kind of initiative that like that branch is working on, because it can touch all the branches. And you can feel free to jump in if you want to, but does that help?
Can I give you an analogy, Candace?
Sure.
So, my analogies are always crazy.
They are.
So say you're in your kitchen, and you say to yourself, I need to cook dinner, and I need a knife. I'm gonna make a knife. And someone comes to you and says, but there's a knife in this drawer. Why don't you just use that knife? And you're like, but I want to make a knife. Like, yeah, we got one right here. And so it's like there is a tool at your disposal to solve the problem that you see.
Right.
And instead of focusing on using that tool, you're focused on the concept of making a tool.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Here we go.
that's a good point. So then as far as utilizing the tool of the communications branch, right, in order to bridge that gap, right, how do we create an accountability system between the Senate and the media communications branch? Because in order to do our baseline jobs, right, regardless of whether we do it or they do it, and I think that you're right, that the media communications branch should fill that role because that's what they're for. But how do we create that accountability and get that information that we wanted so that we can do our jobs to our best ability without getting involved ourselves, right? Because if we just put it off to the side and say, hands off, we're just going to let you guys do your own thing without any like enforced or thought of like system in place to facilitate that communication, then I don't really see anything changing. Because I think that you need to have the Senate driving the things that the Senate wants out of the communications branch, right? And they're not going to know what we want unless we can effectively communicate that to them.
We might already have the knife, but the Senate, the body, still needs to use it.
That's not how to use it.
Right.
I think using it is different though than, I want Senate to get away from a mentality that it's had in the past of like Senate has to do everything other than, or nothing's getting it done. And I think that's where, can you give some context as to like what y'all will do, or?
Yeah, so I I want to talk about that exactly because I think you're exactly right. It's like if there's no system, then us just saying, okay, comms is gonna take care of it. That makes no sense to you guys. I completely agree. I think that honestly, it's gonna take some experimentation because the executive branch for sure has never looked like this before. You guys have kind of never looked like this before with group initiatives, and so everything's new and it's weird. We are talking to our PR people that we've hired to see if someone wants to come to Senate regularly. If that doesn't work, then maybe it looks like us assigning communications department people to visit all of you during your office hours and get updates from you. If that doesn't work, we try something else. But I agree that a system needs to be in place because otherwise it's arbitrary and it's weird.
Right, well, and that was sort of the idea of the revised initiative that I talked about with Colin, is to set up these systems so that they can be in place for future years, right? So get a focus group that just sets this up, and then it can last, and then other senators in the future can use it so that we can patch that hole, and then do other initiatives so we don't have to work internally anymore.
And I think that's a fantastic thought, but I think that's something that has to happen outside of Senate.
Okay.
I think that's something that you would bring up to Colin and have conversations with him in your capacity as a member and officer of SGA, but not as a senator, because that's not really an initiative. Initiatives would be you representing undergraduate students to a higher capacity and not something internal to the organization.
Well, yeah, so you're identifying an operational hole, operational flaw, and you want to fix it.
Right.
So, what's the mechanism that would not only serve Senate, but serve the organization as a whole about getting things to comms so that they can then get it out.
Right.
How they get it out is up to them, and you can provide them with ideas if something strikes you, right? But you don't have to do that. Just like they don't sort of trusting people to do their work, right? But there does need to there needs to be a mechanism in which people, finance board, the Senate, other parts of SGA can get stuff to the communications branch so that they can then get it out.
Brandon, you have something you want to say? Go ahead.
I think, like what everyone else is saying, how, so like one thing that struck a chord was like accountability, because I was like SRC. And so if there is a liaison from the communications department that comes in here, then we expect them to be here. And if they're not here, we hold them accountable. And that goes into their stipend or anything like that. Also, with Senate focusing on this as an initiative, I think it takes up space that could be better utilized.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally fine with changing the initiative. I'm just trying to point out that hole that we're trying to fix it's just still there, you know. So how do we address that?
Maybe not as an initiative, but just something in general.
Looks like when Colin comes in and gives us monthly updates on the first Monday of every month, and if people haven't been showing up for it's having those conversations and having one-on-ones with Colin and Brenda, not a lot of our job, but part of our job as the legislative branch is also check Colin and Brenda and their people. So if they're not doing that, then that affects their stipend as well, and that affects the work that they're doing, and we should be holding them accountable to it. Yeah.
I'm wondering, like, one thing that we can do is affect legislation, and that's something that's also like sustainable. Would it be useful to have like the same way we have senators on shared governance committees? Would it be useful to have a senator on comms? If they're not coming here, should like one of us be sharing out? So it's less like we're sending like 6 senators on this thing, but just like one of them. One senator, or at least as another option.
I like the ideas. I just feel like the scope of that conversation now is kind of going beyond what it needs to be, like what it means to be a senator, and I feel like that could be utilized at another time. Not me.
Alright, so how are people feeling? Did someone say something?
I said also.
Oh, okay, sorry.
After two.
Okay, well. So what are we gonna do? Do we want to keep having this conversation, or do we want to move on with it?
I would say move forward first. Yeah, that's just me. Kind of dealt with this. Answered the questions we need to answer from it. Got what we needed out of this.
Shared governance updates.
Always.
Get the breath.
Brandon, you have them, right?
Okay, so.
I have updates, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, William, if you were like clearing your throat to like your updates.
I was thinking like time it is.
Okay.
And then you do not do mine.
Oh, okay. So I forgot my journal and everything going through, so should I tell things from the top of my head, or should I wait till next week?
It's up to you. If you think that you'd be better off with your notes, feel free to do that, but also if you feel pretty confident remembering things, it's fine.
Okay, from what I remember, there was some concerns about ILSB, because most of it's glass panel. They're worried about bird collision.
I remember they said that. Huh? It's real.
Yeah.
I'm worried about
bird collisions. And not to like the extent of the building, but for the safety of the bird.
Wow.
Birds. But in the end, 95% of the time, birds just gonna, not die, but it's gonna get dazed and fly off, because that's what happens 95% of the time.
It's gonna be raining birds from morning to
The last one of all fires was a dead bird.
Yeah. But bird collisions were about Felix's pollinator garden. I know.
Have you been taking that on? Did you like take that on? Huh?
It's done.
It's dead.
It's done. Complete. It's complete.
Well, yeah, but like if somebody, I didn't know if Kyle was taking on the manage it or like see it's very good.
Yeah. So it's technically done. And the reason why it looks the way it does right now is because of two things. One is that it's it's supposed to kind of look like that for now because the flowers and stuff hasn't bloomed yet. So that's one thing. But another one was weed concerns. They were wondering if SGA would be willing to help maintenance it or take off maintenance.
Yeah, so this lush.
Oh really?
I mean, I feel like C as the organization.
Huh?
Like C, like do the environmental something.
Oh, yeah.
Is it a garden club?
Right, exactly.
Or some cannabis stuff.
I think if we bring it to their attention, they'd be interested.
So I can probably, do you want me to reach out to C or other? Okay.
Yeah, I think that'd be best, just to make sure other people that are more tied to that type of work will benefit from it probably better than we would.
Okay. I can reach out to them.
Thank you.
Something about a Sierra website. It's totally outdated. It looks something straight out of the 90s.
What was that?
Sierra, S-E-R-A.
Oh, like a Sarah Trail.
Yeah, like that. Oh, is it Sarah? I haven't called it Sierra.
C-E-R-A. It's like a research thing.
Oh,
It's like between the freshman lot
Right.
and
Yeah. They're trying to update the website because it's really outdated and try to put it more out there for students to use. There was concerns about herbicide usage. So Yasmin, let me know if I get this wrong. From what I remember, herbicide, it's environmentally friendly, but they were looking at a few ways to reduce it. One distinct one that I remember is looking at how Towson, a method Towson uses to get rid of invasive plants, and it's all funded by the state, so maybe it's for one day you bring in goats to eat the
Eco goats? Eco
Wait, is
goats?
that like seriously goes?
Yeah, my best friend's mom works for Eco Goats.
maybe
I have a shirt.
Well, I mean, we're getting other berry from the ILS.
Eco Goats are the best thing in this world. So Eco Goats, primarily, so like she's done work with them on like the Chesapeake Bay region, but so there's a bunch of invasive species that grow, and basically, so you fence in the area, right? With like chicken wire, it's like electrified. Don't touch it, you'll die. Just kidding. It just hurts a little bit. So you put the goats in there, right? And they just like live, and you like go out and feed them, but they just kind of like do their thing, and like within a few weeks or a few months, depending on how big the area is, they just eat all the invasive species.
Right.
They're the best things on this earth. Goats are my favorite animal. So
There we go.
my dad tells me to go.
It's good.
But yeah, so it's pretty dope.
So, but there were some concerns about that because they were worried because they might leave a mess behind, like somewhere, like maybe I can grow or somewhere.
A mess, the goats.
So they're still looking at other options, but just want to clarify that I forgot his name, but the director of the facilities management said that the herbicide usage is the ones that we're using right now, because it's a small percentage of what we use. Oh, and about the parking garage, there was talks about like Felix's garden being replaced by it. It's like number 3 choice. It's not ideally, so most likely going to be up there somewhere. They might put a sign, more visual sign by the trail. I can remember from the top of my head.
Comment. It makes it seem like they really value Felix's initiative. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, and the garden might become like an official, because it meets all the required for like becoming an official park garden, like the state national park.
Like Baywise? Baywise?
Like a state garden.
Like a state garden.
State garden.
Like it actually protected by the state, like as an official.
State.
It does meet all requirements, and honestly, we can put in forms to, yeah.
So maybe ourselves, like, we would prevent one from being able to build or like renovate or use that land for like that kind of stuff. It'd be an official thing to like this is an area reserved just for nature. It fits all the requirements and it will stay like that.
Right.
Yeah, there's a couple like there's like the wildlife section on campus that like can't be touched.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alright, other updates?
You want to go?
How much time updates?
Updates.
Okay, so I was at the library renewal committee, and this meeting, it was just a walk around the library where they just talked about all the different things they wanted to do. So it started off in the gallery, and then there were a couple questions raised as far as should the gallery be where it is, and does everybody know where the gallery is?
Library gallery?
No?
Yes.
Yes?
Went there today?
Like a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah, so the questions are like, could it be better used? Maybe they were thinking about maybe it could be used as like something like an RLC or I don't know, a different room, because they do have lectures there, but isn't the best place that they could be having lectures, you know? And then there's also special collections back in that corner. Have you guys ever seen special collections?
Yeah.
That's where they have basically a museum of a bunch of original work. So whether that's writings or like photos or paintings. And apparently they were saying that there's not a lot of space there. So part of their project would be to get out some of the junk, because there's like boxes piled up everywhere, and moving that downstairs and opening up the space for the people working there. So that was the gallery. Then after that, they just went around the first floor, and one of the main focuses was reducing the number of service points. So essentially having having students be less confused about where they can get different resources. So maybe the do-it-help desk would be one. And then you have the circulation desk, or whatever it's called, where you can do multiple different things at each service section. Whether that might be getting a laptop to use, or to rent a laptop at the library, or to check out a book. So just condensing those and doing more things at each service station, so that students don't have to be moving all around the library to figure out what they want to do. They checked it, or they want the atrium right below the staircase when you go up to the second floor, where it's like a circle. They wanted to put a media wall there, so it'd be a big screen, like a big wall, curved wall of like a monitor or a screen that's interactable with touch. They said there was something similar at Johns Hopkins. So they said that students would be able to, if they were studying chemistry, for example, put up the chemical formula of something and move around the different parts on the wall. So it's just an interactive media wall. It's pretty cool. Then there was also maker spaces. So if you go into the RLC and then if you go through that wall, so they're going to be opening up the RLC. If you go through that wall, it's what used to be office space that they used when everything was paper copies. Now it's all digital. So that space there is probably what they're going to turn into maker spaces. And they want to do 2 maker spaces. So one would be focused around, I think it's 3D printing. And the other one would be focused around, I think, like laser cutting and water cutting for different materials. And the idea behind that is so that students who aren't in engineering majors could use that space as a way to do sort of like a prove-it type of thing, where it's like a test of a proof or whatever it's called. When you do something just to prove the idea works, and then they can take whatever they made in that area back to their department. So a theater major, if they had like a new lighting design, could then go build a prototype of it in that makerspace and then bring it back to their theater department and see how they could incorporate that into their show. So that was most of the first floor. Then it was the 7th floor, and they talked a lot about, they mentioned that there was no group space rooms like there were on the other floors, so that's something that they want to add in up there. And they thought about, there was talk about clearing out all the stacks from the 7th floor, making that more of a seminar / I think study area. Okay, there wasn't much talk about like the middle floors, but then they went to the 2nd floor, and if you guys know in the 2nd, or if you have ever been on the 2nd floor, and you go up the stairs, and let's say you go up to the right, you guys know the patio section, or the rock section? It's like open to the outside, where there's a door and you can open it up, and it's like rocks all over the ground. It's not very pleasing to look at. Well, they were thinking about turning that into a patio area where students could go outside and like have like tables and stuff. Then they mentioned that there was a pretty inefficient usage of space as far as the space was concerned there. One thing they also brought up would be the fact that the floor of the 2nd floor has an opening that's very aesthetically pleasing. It opens up to the 1st floor, but it's all like different space that could be utilized for other reasons. So there was talk about potentially just covering that up with floor and creating more space in the 2nd floor. Some of the study spaces on the 2nd floor would be turned into rooms or offices where faculty adjuncts would be able to reserve space for office hours or for temporary office when they're in. So faculty adjuncts are just faculty that aren't full-time, they come in occasionally. So when one faculty was out, the other faculty would be in, for example. One of the goals is to remove all the second copies of all books so that they can reduce stack space. And also there was talk about any book that they had in digital format to be removing that from the stacks as well, because it's redundant now in like the digital age. You know the study area where a lot of students like to study on the second floor, if you go straight and make a left, that big area, they're talking about potential changes to that, just because it's a lot of space.
What kind of changes, like moving around the tables or adding more, like?
I don't know if it would still be a study space, but it might be. I didn't really get, see that one was, I was like a little bit like the, you know, like that's a space like a lot of students like to study.
It's also big, so they can fit a lot of people, so.
Yeah, those are more tables, like, with that.
Oh, no, and then there was talk about just adding new access points to the library instead of just having the main entrance. So then students from the apartments, for example, could come in the back, or you could have just different ways into the library. And that pretty much sums it up. Yeah.
Did they talk about the basement at all?
Just using it as storage, really. So, have you guys ever been by the Honors College offices? Where they have all those like metal shelving units? They talk about moving all of those downstairs. So, a lot of compact storage is what they had in mind for the basement. Anybody else have a question? Yeah.
Are they looking for feedback?
I mean, I'm sure. Well, that's one of the reasons I told Lily to invite Heather, because she's the head of the committee. So,
Yeah.
But
I just wanted to push back a bit on like the TV wall. I don't have like penny pinching right now, but I can talk about that later.
push back on it.
Yeah, I think, or I want to open up that thing. It's like a high traffic area where people like trying to go up and down stairs. So if someone's like playing on the wall, I don't know if that's like the best place for something like that. If you want an interactive TV, I think it'd be better placed in like that RLC boardroom area and not that little circle space.
I think if I had to guess, the reason I want it there is like they can like seem like it's like this. They can show it off as they give tours, libraries, something like that. But I agree, it's not practical like for utilization.
So I have a couple things. So when you said like you said go in the RLC and you go past that, like you go through the wall or something like that. Is that like behind the RLC? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah. So behind the RLC.
Yeah.
Where it's student and staff only right now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's the area.
Okay. And then also you were saying like they were considering like where the gallery is right now, making that like another study area / RLC kind of thing.
Potentially, they don't know what they just asked the question of what could we do better with this space.
Mm-hmm.
But it looks like from their reactions that they don't want it to be the gallery anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Also, I think if they're talking about doing presentations, and if they don't want to use the gallery, I think using the 7th floor would probably just be fine.
Mm-hmm.
That's
what it's looking like.
Yeah.
I think they want to concentrate the 7th floor as a seminar area.
Yeah.
So yeah, keep going.
Also, did they talk about that room, like that president's room or whatever, on the 7th floor?
The big room?
Yeah, it's just like a big room. I don't know if it's ever, I guess it's used.
We've had one of our meetings in there, but not specifically during the tour.
Okay.
Yeah, so I don't know what they want to do with that.
Yeah, I feel like if they like just like, oh, also, yeah. Did they talk about on the 1st floor, like that room? It's like a random room that has like a bunch of new books in it. You know?
Oh, the
it's like next to the elevator.
Yeah, yeah.
Did they talk about that?
Yeah, you guys are.
Yeah. Did they talk about that at all? No. Okay.
So.
Did they talk about Einstein in the ROC? Their refrigerators in the ROC.
Yes. They just noted that they were there. They didn't say anything about
Okay.
about leaving exactly. So. They're like, there's Einstein refrigerators. And then just went from there.
Space is a struggle. Go ahead, Jordan.
I like that idea. I feel like it would be a good idea. So a couple of things now. the adjunct professor floor, how big would this, like, is it like gonna be a lot of room? Because,
So they're thinking of refurbishing the study rooms that were already on the second floor.
okay,
And then making those sort of like adjunct professor rooms.
okay. Yeah, I think they don't, I don't know if they have space enough, but that would be good. And also, if they're gonna clear out the 7th floor, would it just be like, a study area, or like, what would it be instead of like the books?
I'm thinking it would be, from what I heard, it would be, they'd add a bunch of study rooms to it,
Mm-hmm.
and probably seminar space.
Hmm.
I don't know as far as it being like another RLC type of thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense either.
Probably not. So that part closes.
Because why would you have RLC up there and down there? That'd be awful.
Yeah,
I
and the
think it
purpose
really-
of the RLC is that,
Do you mind if I just take a picture from my annual?
yeah, go ahead. Whole purpose of it is that it stays open 24 hours because that part closes.
Yeah, then if you have it RLC on the 7th floor, the whole library open basically.
No, they would do that.
No.
They would just close it down. So yeah, the RLC was a student initiative for some. Who would have thought? All right, other questions, updates? Jordan, you're very excited about this.
I have a lot of questions.
It's good. Patrick?
If I could just say, and I normally would do this because I love you guys all here, so if we just remain cognizant of like the time,
Mhm.
just because I know you a lot, I know you a lot. So like, just,
It is 9:30.
I love you guys a
So-
lot, I do love you, so.
I can put on the floor. If everybody's okay pushing street governance updates to next week, we won't have a speaker coming in, so we'll have a little bit more time to like actually have. It's either we rush through them and we don't have as much good conversation, or we wait till next week and we can have like conversation with questions and stuff. Yeah, Jordan.
Actually, I had a comment about that. It was kind of about, it has something to do with communications. It was an idea that came up when we were talking. But how does everyone feel like if we did like the shared governance things, like once we like got it like scheduled, like doing them in the beginning. So like if people wanted to come in, they wouldn't have to like wait till the end of the meeting or something like that. Doing like the shared governance updates in the beginning of the meeting, and then like just doing the rest of our work after that.
That's always a thing we can do.
Yeah.
As long as we don't have speakers. I try to, with speakers.
Because you want to get them here as early as possible, so they don't have to say, yeah.
But for most meetings, we can do that too.
Yeah. And I think that would be, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, the meeting flow is very open to, I don't really care. As long as work gets done, I don't care. All right, so is everybody okay with us doing it next week and we can just adjourn now and pass the gavel and head out?
I have one, for
Pricing.
So with the .5 part of my update is RSA, because I have to go to GDMs, since I'm commuting for that. But the main thing that they want to mention is that they have a town hall from 5:30 to 7 in the Park Community Center, which includes a lot of stakeholders on campus. It's mainly for residential students. If you're a commuter and you come because you're interested, they're not going to stop you. But it is directed towards residential students. They'll have people there from the President's Circle, dining, transit, but most importantly, the big man himself, Police Chief Paul Dillon, will be in attendance. So,
If you want to there.
yeah. So, if there are any pressing questions you'd like to ask.
When is it? When do we have it?
Sorry, this Wednesday from 5:30 to 7 at the Harvard Community Center. So yeah, if there are things you wish to ask him or information you want to know, that's a good time because it's his first kind of face-to-face thing that he's doing. Or not really face-to-face, but like the first kind of like open discussion forum involving police since the CSO started. So,
Which is great. But on the other hand, I'd like to play devil's advocate that they bring many other stakeholders as well. So make sure your questions are constructive so that it's not just accosting Paul Dillon.
yeah, please don't accost him.
Because at that point, there's no point in RSA Town Hall if we're just berating a police
I
chief.
feel like, and just me, that's gonna let it be what it devolves into. But
Right.
I think a while.
But I'm at least encouraging you all as senators
Yeah,
to not go accost
please don't
people
do that.
and or encourage people to go accost him.
But I thought that since it is something that we have been dealing with, and since we are kind of need to be the ones who know what's going on campus, it'd be very useful if you could to attend that just to hear the side and kind of what's been going on there. So it just gets cool.
Thanks.
And I watched the rest of my week 3. Cool.
Cool. Okay. I don't really have any. Please fill out the doodle whenever I do it, and yeah, we're not going to do this right now. We're doing it next week. Cool. Any other announcements that are shared for this week? I will not be here, so I fly out tomorrow. If you email me, you will get an away message. If it's pressing, please text me. Brandon? I don't come back until Saturday night.